Welcome. My name is Wendy Peart, and I am the Curator of Education and Community Outreach at Dunlop Art Gallery. Welcome to the opening remarks and the artist talk for the exhibition States of Collapse, which will be opening here at Dunlop Art Gallery on January 30th. Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge that we are currently situated on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional territory of Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We would also like to thank the diverse Indigenous peoples whose footsteps have marked this territory. I would also like to thank Nickel Galleries for the loan of Jude Griebel's work offshore and the Mackenzie Art Gallery for the loan of Ruth Cuthand's work, She Went to Town. We would like to thank our key funders, Canada Council for the Arts, Sask Arts, Sask Culture, Sask Lotteries, and the Government of Canada, Canadian Heritage. Just going to give you a little background information about how we developed this current exhibition. We started discussing a large group exhibition about the apocalypse, which started quite a few years, well, about 3 years ago, actually. And at the time, we had curator-director Jennifer Matatek and a curator of moving image and performance, Blair Fornwald. The three of us were discussing this for a while. And in 2019, we began deeper research. Along with some staff changes, we invited 2 other curators because we decided we needed a few extra voices to our team. So Stacey Fayant and Amber Christensen joined us, and following a few other staff changes, Tomas Jonsson joined our Dunlop staff team. This was a very collaborative and generative project that involved multiple conversations around the expansive themes that we were considering. And we kind of narrowed it down to a few key themes that addressed perspectives around environmental collapse through industrialization, cultural degradation through acts of imperialism, radical changes to our sense of communities as defined by a movement from rural-based agricultural systems to large urban industrialized centers. And last but not least, biological catastrophism, which we are currently experiencing and have been for the last year or so. So we narrowed down our key artist list, which was very difficult. And we were planning for this exhibition to happen in summer 2020, but then March happened, and our plans were suddenly disrupted. During that time, we have now rebuilt the exhibition with the addition of a few more artistic perspectives that represent our current lived experiences. Hence, we have created an exhibition representing the work of 15 artists and over 60 art students from around the world. What excites me most about this exhibition is that through the work presented here, we can deepen the conversations that we have begun having and recognize that this is a really critical moment in time. It is an opportunity for real change, a real potential for a better, kinder, care-centered, and sustainable future. Now, independent curator and artist Stacey Fant will speak.
Hi there. I'm Stacey Fayant. I'm Métis Cree Saulteaux on my dad's side and French on my mom's side. I'm a member of the Papikasas First Nation, and I grew up here in Regina. As Wendy said, I'm an artist here. As she said, when we started planning this show, we were talking about apocalypse and referring to the show as apocalypse and what that word and that idea means and what it can be. Interesting to me is that the word itself originally means revealing of knowledge or a disclosure of like great knowledge, but still revealing of knowledge. And popularly, we think of it more as the end of the world, as a great calamity, a drastic change, a traumatic change. And so I got to thinking about that. And I, like a lot of people, really like to read post-apocalyptic books. It's mostly what I read. And I was thinking about why I'm attracted to that. What about those stories attract me? Is it the trauma? As an Indigenous woman, my everyday lived experience is post-apocalyptic. Colonization drastically changed the way Indigenous peoples lived and saw their futures. And it continues to affect how we live. It created generations of people who are grieving for what was and struggling to survive. And so I think I relate to those people in apocalypse stories. I relate to their trauma, of course, but I also relate to their hope and the banding together in those stories, the struggling to survive something that was never expected. So why I'm excited about this show is that prior to March, I think a lot of people wouldn't have thought of themselves as having survived an apocalypse or living through an apocalypse. So now, having shared that experience, we can walk through this exhibition and look at the work, some of which was created before the pandemic and some of which was created after. And we can remember what our fears were of the future. We can remember the people around us who maybe had already experienced a shocking traumatic change, but now having lived a shocking traumatic change together, we can hopefully move forward with more empathy and more understanding for each other. So thank you. And now independent curator Amber Christensen will speak.
Thank you, Stacy. Yes, I'm Amber Christensen. I'm an independent, primarily experimental moving image curator and programmer, but I'm also a public librarian and I'm the department head here at Central Library. And I'm pretty excited to get my art world and library world merging here through this exhibition. As my co-curators have touched on, we did start to talk about this exhibition pre-COVID, before it had a really visible presence in Canada. And it was quite removed from our day-to-day realities in Saskatchewan. And like my co-curators, like Stacy just mentioned, I've also long been drawn to dystopian narratives in fiction and film, love Tarkovsky's Stalker, love Jeff Barnaby's Blood Quantum, but now we're in a dystopian present, and that feels a lot different than just reading or watching that. And it's a reminder, though, that time and history are made up of a multiplicity of collapses through various times. What drew me to this show, really, this idea of states of collapse, this constant state of collapse, is kind of thinking about how different people always perceive that and how your lived experience might inform how you view what a state of collapse is. I am a second and third generation settler in Saskatchewan, mainly growing up in the Treaty 6 areas. And my family, like many settlers to this area, have very strong agrarian ties. So for me, when I look at the photographs from Jeff Wisniak, and his work is at the Sherwood Village Gallery, there's beautiful images of rural decay here on the Saskatchewan plains. But it also brings to mind how these areas, these lands are constantly reinscribed, including moving from family farms, which my grandfathers were a part of, and grandmothers, not to forget them, have moved to these huge commercial, large scale farms. But ultimately, when we think about it, it's been a displacement of First Nations people who have been on this land, and it also has been a removal of people through controlling food sources. So those images are so complex. And I'm also really intrigued with the work that Sylvia Zeeman brings to the show, Carnival at the End of the World, which it seems really whimsical, and there are these really fun dioramas, but it is sort of hearkening to this idea of a potential future, one of the potential futures that could come when there's an over-reliance on unsustainable industrial practices that can lead to that collapse of environmental and economic systems. What's so great about the show, though, is that it's both plains artists, prairie artists, and artists from so many geographical areas like Wendy talked about. And it's this merging of all these multiple possible futures and pasts and these dialogues that are happening here. And I think that's really important, considering the time that we're in right now, to have these artists help us to think through all of those moments. And it's really a time that I feel like every decision we make is a lot weightier than other times. So thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of the show. And I'm going to turn this over finally to Tomas Jonsson, who's the curator of performance and moving images here at the Dunlop Art Gallery.
Thanks so much, Amber. Yes, my name's Thomas, and I'm a recent settler to Treaty 4 territory, coming from Treaty 7 in Calgary. I'm happy to have joined this project through Dunlop Art Gallery and to be able to support the practices of many of the artists within the gallery and also extending beyond the space. Like my co-curators, my interest in the exhibition has been fueled by the present work of writers such as Octavia E. Butler, whose books Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents have anticipated the conditions that we find ourselves contending with. I also think about the author Arundhati Roy, who recognizes our current moment as a rupture, which we need to pay attention to and experience rather than simply stitching the past to the future. And I see this integrated throughout the work by artists in this exhibition. I'd like to point out, in addition to tonight's artist talk, that we have a number of other programs developed as part of this exhibition, which includes a discussion with Rachel Viator-Knowles, Sean Caulfield, and Patrick Mann on the topic of the also prescient Vaccine Nation and Immune Nations projects on February 23rd, and that work is featured on the exterior of the gallery and also at Sherwood Gallery. There'll also be an artist talk by Andrea Carlson on March 16th and a number of other events that we'll have details of on our website or also on Dunlop Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and our YouTube pages. And now it's my deep pleasure to introduce Cindy Baker, who will in turn introduce our panelists. Cindy Baker is a contemporary artist based in Western Canada, whose work engaging with queer, gender, disability, fat, and art discourses draws upon 25 years working and organizing in her communities. Baker has exhibited and performed across Canada and internationally, and continues to maintain volunteer leadership roles across her communities. Thanks so much, Cindy, and thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Thomas, and thanks to all the curators and organizers of this exhibition. I'm really excited to be here and to be a part of the show. Tonight, I'll be talking with three of the artists in the exhibition, Jude Griebel, Jill Hoyu, and Sylvia Zeeman. I'm going to introduce them a bit more formally in just a couple of minutes before asking them to give us a bit more insight into their work. This is a really interesting time to open an exhibition about the state of the world, in great part because of the pandemic, because of the political climate, especially here in North America, but also because the Doomsday Clock resets in just under 14 hours. The Doomsday Clock is a universally recognized indicator of the world's vulnerability to catastrophe from nuclear weapons, climate change, and disruptive technologies in other domains. In 2020, the clock was set to 100 seconds to midnight. So I guess we'll see tomorrow morning where we're at. As I state in my essay for the exhibition, of all the hundreds of ways that we've been warned that the world might end, plagues and disease, wars, nuclear disasters, rising sea levels, environmental collapse, biological terrorism, technological collapse, artificial intelligence run amok, and so many more. One of the most realistic to me, and maybe the most reassuring assessment, is the one that suggests that we can't yet fathom the thing that will become our ultimate undoing, whatever that undoing might mean to each of us. All of these calamities, to me, just seems way too easy to imagine. And it's because we have imagined them again and again in our stories, our movies, our books, our tales. And each of those stories ends fairly neatly, if not happily, with a conclusion of one kind or another that we're there to witness, feel resolution for, and move on with our lives. That's what these tales are meant to do, is to give us a feeling of understanding of our surroundings. Contemporary artists, though, don't tend to wrap things up with neat bows. We ask questions, we pose problems, we imagine possibilities, we offer suggestions, and we refuse resolution. We play a really important role in an uncertain world. We help the world become familiar with uncertainty and chaos. As artists, we may not yet be able to fathom the apocalypse, but I guarantee that the artists in this exhibition are creating the unfathomable right now. So now I'm going to introduce each of the artists on the panel, give them the opportunity to talk about their work in this exhibition, and then we'll have a discussion about the exhibition, the artist's works, and all the themes raised. We'll open up the floor to questions from the audience at that point. If you do have questions for artists or curators, I suppose, as they arise, please enter them into the live chat. I'm going to ask that you refrain from too much banter in the chat so the questions are easy to find. With that, I'm going to introduce the artist to you. We're going to start with Jude Griebel. Jude works between Bergen, Alberta and Brooklyn, New York. He's completed numerous international residencies, including the Halle 14 Center for Contemporary Art in Leipzig, the International Studio and Curatorial Program in New York, and Pioneer Works in New York. Recent solo exhibitions include the Esker Foundation in Calgary, Redpath Museum in Montreal, and Galerie Johannes Sturm in Nuremberg, Germany. Jude is a 3-time recipient of the Elizabeth Greenshields Foundation grant for emerging figurative artists. Welcome, Jude.
Thank you very much, Cindy. And thank you also to all the curators and the whole team at the Dunlop. I'm sorry I can't be present in Saskatchewan, as I'd really like to spend more time with the exhibition and seeing the other works in the show. So I'll speak briefly about some of my work in the exhibition. For the past 10 years, I've been creating sculptures that combine figures and the environment in single sculptural forms. These works sort of originally spoke to my family's farming history and agricultural history on the prairies, but have over the years broadened to look at industrial impact, human behaviors, and neglects in terms of the sort of consuming and impact on the environment and the physical and psychological fallout of that. These works are predominantly made from carved wood and papier-mâché, so there's a really high sort of craft process and sensibility to the work. And the works in the exhibition are predominantly from a series that I've been creating for the past 3 years called Illuminated Collapse, that deals strictly with the idea of planetary collapse and trying to process these very complex themes. So doing that, I kind of created a large image bank of scientific articles, but also sort of fictional narratives about apocalypse and collapse, and wove that together with personal narratives and autobiography to create these pieces. So when you're looking at them, there's sort of a fantastic understanding of these very complex themes that sort of provides an access point for people into these very difficult themes and thinking about them in certain ways. Many of the works in the exhibition are dioramas on round circular bases. And so there are these detailed miniature environments that you look into and sort of navigate to learn about these larger scenes that are happening within them. Some major influences for the works were these novelty miniature museums, which I became very interested in, and natural history dioramas as well, as these miniature spaces that help us understand the broader world. And so these various pieces look at sort of sites of overpopulation and collapse. One of the pieces in the exhibition, titled Ice Cap, is a city with a large polar ice cap in the center, which is melting and flooding this miniature city around it. In the ice cap are various human eyes, and the water from the ice cap is flowing out of these eyes, which is sort of a tongue-in-cheek nod towards collective culpability for these situations. So there is a lot of humor in the work. There's a lot of struggling with these difficult ideas. And part of this struggle comes from being aware that I'm also an active participant in all of this and wrestling with these ideas. You know, I'm very aware that when I'm creating these pieces, that all the materials I'm working with have a certain footprint, that these works, even having an exhibition like this, you know, all these works are being packaged, shipped to a venue, being lit, and they become active consumers in themselves. So there's this sense of sort of struggle and playfulness in the work. All the miniature details are carved, mostly from wood, and then rendered to create this larger illusion that you sort of walk around and look into. And these small illusionistic spaces I've found have been a really interesting access point for a diverse public to it's provided an access point for a diverse public to sort of understand or find their way into these scenes and then confront these larger issues. Another piece that I have in the work is titled Offshore, and it's a large figure, a hybrid figure composed of various shells, and it's stepping out of a waste of plastic, or out of a reef of plastic waste. And it's sort of it's looking at these, the theme of polluted shorelines, but also of these all-inclusive resorts where these shell figures might be sold in tourist shops. In this case, it's a large figure composed of ocean life, stepping out of a polluted shoreline.
Great. Thanks, Jude. Next up is Jill. Jill Hoyu is an assistant professor in print media at the Alberta University of the Arts. Her practice explores the intersection of trauma, embodied memory, and the environment through a mixture of print media, installation, and drawing. Jill's work has been exhibited at the University of the Arts in Philadelphia, the Alberta Printmakers in Calgary, Kyoto Municipal Museum of Art in Japan, the International Print Center in New York, and the National Taiwan Museum of Fine Arts. Jill.
Thank you, Cindy. I just want to echo Jude's comments and thank everybody at the Dunlop for organizing this show, which I think is really amazing, and then as well as doing all the hard work, installing the work and everything. So the work that I have in this exhibition is really centered around exploring the anxieties we have about global warming and environmental catastrophe, and trying to wrestle with how can we psychologically deal with these possibilities. So I have two pieces in the show. The first piece that you can see on the screen now is called Retrograde, and it is a hybrid bioart print media installation. The images inside the petri dishes are etchings of sort of like urban and industrial ruins that are then embedded in petri dishes and cultured with mold and bacteria. So throughout the span of the exhibition, what happens is the cultures inside the petri dishes grow and they change the images inside of them. So I see this project as a little bit of a nod to what actually will probably outlast humanity and sort of all the other sort of like flora and fauna on the earth if a really large extinction event happens, which would be all the kind of like creepy crawly bacteria and that type of stuff. They're sort of going to be what's left in terms of life forms on the earth. So for me, that project's also kind of fun because it's a bit of an experiment. Every time I make it, the end result is different. And then the other work I have in the show is a series of etchings called In the Dust. And those etchings are kind of like speculating or imagining what would remain of human society after humanity has become extinct. And in all these works, I'm sort of pointing to like the worst case scenario if, man-made global warming sort of fulfills its negative prophecy that, all the scientists and research are saying is going to happen. So in those prints, there's a kind of a surreal, slightly uncanny mix of urban spaces that are abandoned and derelict, and all these kind of biomorphic or cellular forms that are sort of simultaneously like digesting what remains of our cities, but then also kind of reclaiming a space that, used to be man-made.
Thank you so much, Jill. And finally, we have Sylvia Zeeman. Sylvia works in sculpture, painting, installation, video, and curation. She's fascinated with carnivals, end-of-the-world scenarios, survivalist tendencies, and the animals who live amongst us. Sylvia holds a diploma in painting from the Alberta University of the Arts, a Bachelor of Fine Arts from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design, and an MFA from the University of Regina, where she teaches painting, drawing, and sculpture. Welcome, Sylvia.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, all the curators, all the people doing this work, and Cindy for hosting like this and writing, I hear, about the show and our work. That's really awesome. Yeah, I have been fascinated with dystopic and utopic scenarios for a long time. And I look at both sides, the world catastrophes, but also our inner catastrophes, right? Because we live in two worlds. We all live in our own mind and our own history and memory and so on. And then we interact with the world out there, and they kind of feed each other back and forth. The work that I have in this show is new. The work is titled Quarantine Diaries. And it's a sculptural work that consists of 5 white boxes on stands, and each box has a viewing window into a room. And inside each room is a miniature scene that imagines characters and their activities in isolation. The characters are animal-human hybrids, which I've used in my work for quite some time. And they sleep and they play and they dream and they draw in these private spaces of reflection. And in the past, I've done work just on after the disaster, and my creatures would be rebuilding and carnival worlds and things like that. And now we're being asked to not go out and not touch each other and not physically interact and cover up and stay home. And I think it's affected people in various ways, of course. Everyone has a different life. But in these 5 scenes, I've used a bit of humor, and I have I look at kind of the dark and the light side of spending too much time alone. In the slide that you showed there, that one is called The Practice of Periodolia. And the figure in it is the animal head is actually based on my dog, who's been a wonderful companion during this time. But it's kind of like an artist alchemist creature looking at a table full of paint splotches and making work from it. So the word periodolia refers to looking at things and seeing patterns, seeing imagery in random patterns. So, for instance, when you're looking at clouds and you see a rabbit in there, or the ink blot tests, things like that. So this is kind of a studio room, and the creature is trying to look at the inside of COVID molecules, and also the insides and the shapes of naval water mines because they're very similar in shape. And the other word for looking at similarities between things that are kind of unrelated is called apophenia. And so this artist character is trying to figure out, what is this virus and how dangerous is it? And comparing it to like the naval mines that they used to randomly float around in the oceans, and a ship would blow up if it hits the landmine. And in the same way, when we're out and if we're not careful, we might get sick and then our world collapses. So I think we're in a very unusual space and time right now. And but I do like to have a little bit of fun with my creatures. So, and like Jude, I like to connect with a broad range of an audience in my work. And I've always said to myself, if kids and old people can't appreciate my work, then I'm not communicating properly. I want a whole range of people to be able to see it in different ways. Everyone will see something different when they get to these little boxes. Oh, and Cindy, I have a Doomsday Clock in, I think it's the rabbit room, the sleeping rabbit, with all the self-help stickers on the wall. There's a rabbit lying in a bed and kind of tucked in there, and there's all these little Post-it notes that say, get up, get going, come on, and then there's a Doomsday Clock, and it's 20 seconds to midnight. So we'll have to see what the actual time is, but that was the last place that I heard it was at, 20 seconds. Yeah. That's all I got.
Thanks so much. Actually, we are the closest we've ever been to midnight right now, in terms of the formal decision of the scientists around the world who make the decision about where the Doomsday Clock is at, and that's 100 seconds to midnight, although I think if they could have shifted the clock up just a few weeks or months ago, they probably would have. In 2021, I'm fairly confident that the hands of the clock won't be moved forward, although I guess I'm crossing my fingers about that one. But I guess the first question I have for all of you is, as an artist, what is the one thing you would do to turn back the hands of the Doomsday Clock?
Wow.
I'll go first. I mean, it's when you start to think about all the interconnected factors that go into all the things that are threatening the environment and human society and cultures right now, it gets very overwhelming. So I would say, as someone who lives in a province that is very much still dependent and like trying to revive fossil fuel industries, I would definitely say it's like for where I'm from, we just need to diversify, and we need to start developing new technologies for energy so we can live more sustainably. And like, I don't know. I mean, I know there's fears that jobs will be lost kind of like immediately, but that won't happen. But we really need to diversify our energy sources.
I'm going to sort of echo Jill in a way, but I've been thinking a lot during the pandemic about how we can make these types of changes just in everyday life and in the art world as well. But just thinking tonight about this talk, for instance, it may have been something we all would have flown or traveled to not long ago, but we're all able to be here on a screen from our various places. But I think that this pandemic too, I mean, we haven't, as a collective whole, been so ready for change, but I think that after this year, it's a really right time for change and for people to embrace that in various ways. So I think that my hope is that maybe travel will lessen and things will stay a little more local and less necessary, and that we're able to shift things in that direction a bit.
Man, styrofoam and plastic. That's where I'd start. I mean, one thing, when I go out to eat and I get a styrofoam container to take my food, I always tell them not to bring that, bring me something else, bring me a baggie. But if we could get rid of the styrofoam, like it's toxic and it stays in the ground forever. It doesn't compost but we can make things out of these things compostable. Same with plastic bags. I was in Paris and years ago when we could travel, Paris, they had plastic bags that they put your groceries in, and they all said on there, will last like 3 months or something like that, and then it'll start falling apart, depending on whether it's in the light or not. So it's made out of non-plastic items. It was made out of corn, I believe. Why isn't this happening? So things like that really get my ire up, because I think of the swirling garbage patch in the ocean. That shouldn't be there. I lose sleep over this stuff, So yeah, I would say, stop the plastic, make it out of organic materials, or find some other way, because it's Dollarama, it keeps morphing and going everywhere. Yeah, that's what I would do if I had power.
Yeah, I think as artists, it's so difficult because we are so romanced by materials, right? We're so attracted, especially to new materials, new mediums as they're created. So consumption is something that is kind of in our bones. We consume and we create new materials, we create new objects for the world to consume and then create more.
That's true, yes.
One thing that I find really compelling about the works in the show, and Jude and Jill, you talked about this a little bit, you're not just making art that's about destruction and chaos, but you're making work which are kind of functions of destruction and chaos. Jude, you talk about the complicity of being an artist, making art that is a function of consumption, and that's about that consumption. And Jill, your work is actively creating while it destroys the medium that you're working in. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the relationship of the media that you work in to the themes of your work and to the theme of the exhibition.
Shall I start, Jill? Or yeah. So yeah, as I was discussing a bit before, it's really a bind for artists creating work speaking to these themes, because every material certainly has its own footprint, whether it's clay excavated from the ground or the glazes that are used on the surfaces, or even digital art being stored on a server somewhere. It's taking up space and it's consuming in its own way. So creating work, speaking to these themes really does become a bind, and it's something I think about often, and that sort of drives my work in various ways as well. I don't have any sort of solution for it at present, but it's something that has become a sort of repetitive theme in my work. And in that way, I think the work is very sort of self-deprecating, and there are always figures embodying these landscapes that are sort of coming apart or involved in some sort of sense of struggle. So it sort of plays out in the pieces themselves. But it's not just the creation of the work that becomes problematic, but it is how the work has to be stored and moved through space, and the whole art fair circuit where things are continuously created and shipped to various parts of the world. becomes really complex and problematic as well. So as an artist, there are all these different factors to sort of think about and consider when you're making this work.
I think for me, part of, I mean, there's practical considerations to the materials I use, and then there's sort of some more, I guess, like maybe thematic reasons. Part of the reason I gravitate towards using etching as a medium is I work with, at least in the installations, I work with multiples. So that's like a very practical way for me to generate multiple images and print multiple images that I can then turn into the installations. Another reason I think for me, etching speaks to me and speaks to the kind of representations of things that I'm interested in is it has like a historical link to things like medical illustrations or like botanical illustrations. So for me, there's a little bit of a link to kind of kind of in a way an informative aspect to the medium, because it does have that link tied to, you know, books and that type of thing. In terms of like the piece that's cultured and grows bacteria and mold, I mean, I really started that piece because I was just generally really curious how it would look and how people would react to it. And I think, you know, there's various other ways I could do that. I could take digital photos of it and just show the photos. But it is really important, I think, for me, both in a thematic way and like a symbolic way, that the Petri dishes they go through a life cycle. They start out with like lots of resources, right, in the medium, and then the cultures grow and they consume the resources, and they reach a point where there isn't enough resources left in the medium starts to dry out, and then they die, and the medium shrinks up. And that's really the cycle. Probably a lot of the work in this show is talking about this cycle of like consumption to the point where it's not sustainable anymore, so things start to collapse. And so for me, it's really important that actually gets to play out kind of in real time. So they're like little microclimates.
I use as much as possible recycled materials in my work. The boxes were made from repurposed wood by Jesse Goddard, a friend of mine. Most of the stuff, pretty much, if I can make it out of nothing, or like, you know, I go to Sally Ann. I buy all my clothes actually at Sally Ann too, or at Value Village. So I like to use recycled materials wherever I can, because I don't want to buy into the consumption too. It's just kind of a thing now with me. But yeah, like in the picture that I showed, or that you have there, yeah. Okay, so the lamp in the back there, the lid is a plastic Slurpee cup lid. So it was clear, and then I painted it up. And there's everything's made by hand. It's made out of cardboard and then painted up, like the table's made out of bits of foam core, and the cabinet I picked up at a Sally Ann. So that was pre-made. But all the books in there and everything, like the floor, is all made it's all made by hand out of just stuff that I have in my studio that I've collected. Yeah, I just really like working that way. It's kind of like I need a thing for my thing. How can I make it out of nothing, right? So, and in a real post-apocalyptic world where everything gets wiped out and you can't go and buy things, you can make stuff. And it's a challenge, but I think it's a really neat way to use your imagination. You know, how can I make something out of nothing and make it look like a real thing? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all. Sylvia, you had been talking about how accessibility to broad audiences feels really important to you. And I think it's also sort of urgent these days to make our work a little bit more accessible. And I know, although we talk about complicity, there's really, I believe there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. But artists do have a responsibility, or maybe a role, of bringing awareness to that consumption. And coming from a place of complicity really humanizes the conversation rather than just preaching, you know, we're all complicit and here we are artists, we are making things. Even those of us that are performing, are traveling, those of us who are making video, we don't talk enough about the carbon footprint that the electrical world, the virtual world takes up. And that's very heavy, but I think you are all making work that, because it shines a light on these issues, brings us some sort of hope through this darkness. I'm wondering if you can talk about some of the ways that you or your work is hopeful about the state of the world.
Well, maybe I'll go first then. I think a sense of humor is really important, and I try to insert that into my work where I can. I think we need to laugh and we need to love more. I think if we can get rid of the hatred that's out there, that's impossible because it's human nature to get really nasty. But I'm hopeful. You know, when things collapse, when you look at Depression time periods and 9/11, let's say, and war, people help each other. You know, they really do. And I think in my work, the creatures that I've created, their world is always about helping. How can you help your neighbor? How can you help? You know, if somebody's in trouble, you know, they've lost someone or they don't have enough food, how can you help? And I think that's kind of an underlying theme in my work, but also just having some humor and, you know, just doing the best you can. You know, I think there's a lot of that in human nature. But I think we have to get rid of some of the desperation in the world. But I can't, anyway, that's a whole other topic too. You were talking about just what's in the work, but I think the humor and the fun in it, you know, so kids, let's say, or whoever come up to my work and they go, oh, look, oh, isn't that cute? And then they see something and go, oh, what's that? You know, and then it makes them think about something else. So there's a bit of both. And one of my favorite quotes is a Margaret Atwood quote. And she said, within every dystopia, there's a little bit of utopia. And within every utopia, there's a little bit of dystopia. And that's human life, right? But you can always find that, the good stuff in the bad, right?
I'll go next. I think that's a really great question. And I've actually had, I've had other people ask me about that because my work is very somber looking and quite kind of clinical. And for me, I think part of the function of showing these speculative images is that, like, we're sensory animals. I mean, we're logical too, to a certain extent, some more than others, I guess, but we respond we respond to images, right? Because we're so visual. So I think there is definitely some usefulness in making these sort of cataclysmic images, because it helps us, it speaks to a different part of our psychology than lists of statistics, right? Like if you think about like warming in the Arctic and how that's affecting polar bears, someone could tell you that, like just give you the data and you would know it logically. But as soon as you see that image of that emaciated polar bear swimming, it hits you like on a more bodily level. And so I would like to think that my work kind of does that and opens up kind of a space where people can start to like imagine, like, what would it look like if, like, what would be left if all life on Earth was gone? You know, what would happen to our cities? What would happen to our infrastructure? And, you know, I am really, despite some of the images, I think I am very hopeful. Like, these images aren't created out of like despair for me, although certainly, like, you know, people are in the right to feel anxious and despair. They're a way of being like, this could be the worst thing that could happen. So now that we've sort of thought about that and imagined that, because it is very difficult to imagine, right? Something that crazy. That's like, okay, now we know we don't want that. So what are kind of the actions we're going to take so that we don't end up in this state?
Yeah, so I feel like in the past year, my work has gotten a little bit more hopeful. I've been building this large image bank to work from over the years that was sort of a database of images of ruined environments and bodies. And with the weight of the past year, I felt like I had to shift the work in a more hopeful direction. And I did that by starting to gather a new data bank of imagined utopic spaces and utopias from various sources, everything from imagined territories in antique sailing maps to imagined realms in sort of VR space. And so I've been collecting these images of what an ideal space might look like. And one resulting work I'm making from that now is a large installation. And it's an installation of various species considered, well, pervasive and nuisance species by the borough of Brooklyn here, where I'm making it. And so it's these various animals and plant species sort of parading over, walking in formation over the ruins of a collapsed world. And everything from cockroaches to dandelions to barnyard grass to a large gypsy moth. And unlike my past work where I've imagined these larger, broader spaces in miniature, I've awarded these species monumental scale. So each of these hybrid insect or plant figures is about 8 to 10 feet in this sort of procession. It's sort of a celebratory parade of sort of the resilience of nature and the triumph of nature after this collapse. So it's very darkly humorous, but kind of tender as well. Some driving influences for the work were revisiting Bosch's Garden of Earthly Delights, where there's this amazing elasticity between species and scale. And it's this sort of alternative realm where this absurd celebration and revelry is taking place. And it also, I often bring in narratives from my own youth or background. And so it's also touching on the narrative of James and the Giant Peach, the 1961 book by Roald Dahl, where this group of despondent insects decides to sort of walk away from the human race in search of an alternative world. So I'm working on this large scale installation right now. And I've also, for this sort of parade image that I'm creating. I've been revisiting a lot of sort of counterculture imagery from the 60s, an archive from the first Earth Day parade, which was 50 years ago. I have this amazing archive of high school students in Denver on the first Earth Day parade. So these various, these images where there was sort of more of a collective optimism about the future. And they're rather than the sort of terrifying urgency that there is now. So after I'm sort of dipping back into that realm a little bit to try and envision some sort of brighter, more hopeful future in that way.
Thank you. Thanks, all. Jude, that reminds me of the Procession of the Species that takes place every year in Olympia, Washington. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not. I would love to know about that, though.
The entire city dresses up as different species of animals, and they're clumped in their various categories.
Oh, no kidding. Wow.
Natural categories. And yeah, every year the whole city gets together. And
if I could, I would travel to that.
Maybe next year.
Yeah, in a safer time.
Yeah. Thanks. I'm going to turn it over to a question from the audience. Raphael says, thank you for this conversation. What is collapse for you? I was born in the mid-'80s. I feel the world has been slipping towards its demise for as long as I have lived. Is the end of the world actually happening? Is collapse a state of permanence?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because theoretically, collapses lead to something new. I think that there is a fairly common feeling in probably any time period in human history that there's some sort of like collapse or catastrophic event that is always on the horizon. I do think, though, now, you know, we have like data driving the kind of environmental collapse that we're facing. I mean, you could look at it and say that collapse is a permanent state, and maybe if we look at it that way, then that provides some direction for us to work continuously against it, versus time periods where we're like, oh, everything's great, nothing's wrong with the world, and then something happens and then we're like, oh crap, right? So I don't know. I mean, things definitely, particularly in the last year, have seemed really bad. I think we'll get through, you know, the pandemic. We'll learn to deal with some of the other like social problems we have, but nothing's ever going to be 100% fixed. Like, I suspect the way we live in a pandemic now, that's going to become normal. So maybe it's not like we're in a permanent state of collapse, but we're in a permanent state of responding to threats to how we presently live, and us being really flexible and ingenious and inventive will keep us sort of in this sort of back and forth equilibrium.
Yeah, I would also say it's definitely a issue of perspective. I mean, certainly both places where I'm spending my time, I'm certainly not dealing with the fallout the way people in other parts of the world are. Most of the information I'm getting about it is through screens, and so I'm not living with the climate shift's greatest effects at the moment. It's not affecting my everyday life, certainly the way it is other people, but also in a planetary sense. I mean, we've gone through a number of mass extinctions, and the world is a resilient place. And I think that even if things as we know are sort of wiped clean in a way, that the world will sort of regenerate in new and interesting ways, which allows me to be somewhat hopeful.
I don't think I have too much to add to that, except for that I think as individuals, there are many states of collapse within ourselves, depending on where we live, you know, which part of the planet we live in, and how we respond to the stress of our situation. Like Stacy was talking about, you know, colonization and that being like this permanent state. So I personally don't think the whole world is going to come to an end. It'll change, and that's we need to change.
Great, thank you. Personally, I think collapse is sort of a state of permanence, natural collapse. And whether we're thinking about the universe constantly collapsing or the cyclical nature of nature. But like looking at our Indigenous oral traditions, they've been mapping global disasters and apocalypse, literal apocalypse, for tens of thousands of years. There's stories that give us tools for navigating the apocalypse. So I think it's fair to say that that the end of the world is coming, and that it is a permanent state, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing. It is a terrible thing, but it's not necessarily something that we all need to fear. I think it's something we need to plan for and learn from and mourn and move forward. If we have time for one more question, maybe not. Do you want to, Sarah, do you want to give me a heads up if we've got time for one more quick question? Or should we say goodbye? We do. Okay, I'll just ask one more quick question of all of the artists. I'd like to know, in practical or less practical ways, how has the pandemic shifted your practice?
I could start. I think that, well, certainly there's been a lot less sort of travel and movement, and I feel that craft has been a really, and craft processes have been really important to my pandemic experience. Just focusing on small things on a day-to-day basis, and I find it really sort of meditative, and there's been a lot of self-care in that, in terms of anxiety about the pandemic and working small and with my hands. So that's been one important thing. And also sort of connecting with people while I work. So whether it's sort of digital craft circles through the Zoom platform, or talking to people while I do, because I think a lot of studio practice is fairly isolated to begin with. But during this time when we're not seeing each other on a regular basis, it's become even more important to connect with other artists for me who are isolated and working.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I've spent more time in the studio, and I've recognized how much time I wasted doing a lot of things like driving to and from for, I don't know, going out for whatever reason, because I have to be at home. So I get up and it's okay. I can't do anything. So I go to the studio. I get more reading done, but it's shifted my daily habits. And it's made me reflect more on how I spend my time. I used to say yes to everything and go to everything, or as much as I could. And now well, I can't. And it's like, oh, okay. So that it's been a big shift that way, because I like people, I like going out, I like engaging, I like to go to openings and parties and things like that. And with that being shut down, well, it's like, oh, I can go to the studio. So yeah.
Yeah, I think for me it really has made me aware that I want to and I need to sort of diversify my practice in terms of what media I use. So I'm very dependent, as are all printmakers, on facilities with lots of equipment and lots of chemicals. And basically, the whole summer our school studios were shut down. So I had to figure out other ways to work. And something, in a way, like lockdown has been good. It was good during the summer because I was working on this really big, very monotonous project. And I didn't have there were no distractions for me. I couldn't go out, couldn't meet with friends, couldn't go shopping or anything. So in a way it's been good because it's focused my time. But in other ways, it has been really difficult because a lot of the mediums I'm used to working in are not really at my disposal. But I think that can turn into a positive for me. Like at first, it was very, very frustrating for me and kind of depressing because I had lots of plans to make stuff. But I think artists need to be flexible, and I think in a way it'll push me to explore working in different ways than I probably wouldn't have otherwise.
Great, thank you. On that note, I want to say that I'm really grateful for the fact that this pandemic, among all of the terrible things it has wrought, it's made it easier for all of us to get together, platforms like this, and to broadcast our art and our ideas further into the world. So thank you all very much for participating in this panel. I'm really excited to see the exhibition in whatever form I can consume it. Thanks so much. And
Thank you, Cindy.
For attending
Yeah,
tonight.
thank you, Cindy.
Hopefully see you
Thank
soon.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.